fifth graders, and welcome to your language arts lesson for today. For today, you will need your white binder or your materials packet, your poetry book. I say paper and pencil again if you've been writing down answers, this would be a great thing to get. And then again, dictionary, this could be a physical dictionary or an online dictionary. Either of those are acceptable. So go ahead and get those materials and then come on back. All right, so before we get into our new poem for today, we're going to be looking at our inferences for I like to see it lap the mile. So a lot of you had a lot of great answers. Remember, I told you that it should not be a living thing, so your inferences should not be living things, right? So some of you said cars or wagons or trains, and the correct inference was trains. Now, again, remember in the assignment, you could have said something else, made a different inference, and done a really great job supporting that inference. So it's less about did you guess the right answer, but more about did you pick quotes that supported your inference and then explain how those quotes support your inference, okay? But we look at the poem, right? I like to see it lap the miles and lick the valleys up. So it's describing how a train kind of moves around and in and out of valleys and stop to feed itself at tanks. A lot of you guys had this as a part of your inference. So when it's feeding itself at tanks, it's talking about the fuel that trains get to operate, right? So they're feeding at tanks. And then prodigious, large, step around a pile of mountains. So we're talking about a train just kind of moving around a mountain. And supercilious, peer in shanties by sides of roads. So this is the description of trains kind of going past homes that are maybe out in more rural areas and kind of peeking in. And then a quarry pair to fit its sides and crawl between, complaining all the while. And so it's kind of talking about cutting through rocks. And so some people have thought like, oh, maybe like a tunnel, right? It's going through, or at least, you know, when they build railroad tracks, they kind of are moving all the way throughout and going through these areas, through and sometimes rocky areas. Complaining all the while in horrid hooting stanza is a description of a train horn, right? Or even when a train starts to brake and it screeches is what it's describing. And then chase itself downhill. This is talking about a train, right? Where there's the engine and then there's the cars behind it. So it's chasing itself downhill. And neigh, like Bonerges, again describing the sounds that a train makes. And then punctual as a star. So think about trains following a schedule. They're on time, so they arrive punctually and they stop. And when trains stop, after all the noise and the screeching and the hooting, they stop and are just silent, right? And they stop docile and omnipotent at its own stable door. And this stable door would be like the train station. Okay, so we see the description of a train. All right, so we're going to be getting into today's objectives. We're going to be reading a poem called Casey at the Bat. It's on page 24, well, pages 24 and 25 in your book. So our first objective is going to be characterizing this character named Casey. And then our second objective is going to be identifying a climax from this poem. This is very much a poem that you could plot the dramatic story arc of. And so looking at identifying that climax, okay? So let's take a look at the homework questions before we get into our lesson. So here we go. As usual, we're looking at what is the poem title. So we want to restate the question in our answer here. So the poem title is, quotation marks, poem title. Who is the poem's author? We would say the poem's author is. We're again going to be looking up some words in the dictionary. So our words are melancholy and defiance. And so either using a physical dictionary or an online dictionary, you're going to be looking up those words and then picking the best definition that fits for the context of the poem. We're going to be checking a rhyme scheme. So again, the poem's rhyme scheme is, remember, it's always a valid answer to say there is no rhyme scheme, although so far that has not happened for us yet. Okay, numbers 6, 7, 8, and 9. These are going to relate directly to our First objective. So what is one character trait that Casey shows? You'd say, one character trait that Casey shows is blank. What is one quote that supports that character trait? So you'd say one quote that supports that character trait is blank. What is a second character trait that Casey shows? So again, you'd say a second character trait that Casey shows is blank. And then what is a second quote that supports that character trait? A second quote that supports that character trait is blank. Number 10 asks, what seems, to be the main emotion that Thayer wants readers to experience? So think about you as the reader or anyone as the reader. What is it that the author seems to want readers to be feeling from his poem? And then you're going to pick two quotes. One quote that supports that answer is blank, and a second quote that supports my answer is blank. And then finally, we have this multiple choice option of what is the climax of the poem. So looking at the poem, remember, of course, that the climax is that last moment when we are wondering about the result of, or what's going to happen to our main character. Okay, so as we're thinking about this character trait question, fifth graders, the reason I asked you to get your white binder or your materials packet is that in that packet, you should be able to find this chart of character traits. So as you're thinking, like, what's a character trait? Okay, you want to be using this as a reference. And again, we're looking for two things that Casey seems to show throughout our poem. All right, with that, fifth graders, we're going to get into it. We're going to read it aloud together. And again, I encourage you to be reading it not just with me, but also reading together with on your own so that you're getting to see through it more than one time. Okay, so as we're about to get into the poem, fifth graders, this is a poem that is a baseball poem. It's a poem about a baseball game. So some things to know about. There are 9 players on the field at a time. Okay, so we usually think of baseball as being 9 players. And so innings, right? Innings are how you divide out the baseball game. And so there's 9 innings in a baseball game. And so you're kind of at the last inning. It's when you kind of have to win the game. You run around bases, first, second, third, and home. You probably know some of this from PE, so this is a little bit of review. You get 3 outs before the end of the inning, and if you're up to bat, meaning you're trying to hit the ball with the bat, you get 3 strikes before you're out as well. So there's a couple of places where they're saying died, and this really means they got out. If they died at first, it means they were thrown out. So we'll see kind of as the outs are developing throughout. So let's get into our poem, Casey at the Bat by Ernest Lawrence Thayer. The outlook wasn't brilliant for the Mudville 9 that day. The score stood 4-2 with but 1 inning more to play. And then when Cooney died at first and Barrows did the same, a pall-like silence fell upon the patrons of the game. A straggling few got up to go in deep despair. The rest clung to the hope that springs eternal in the human breast. They thought if only Casey could but get a whack at that, we'd put up even money now with Casey at the bat. But Flynn preceded Casey, as did also Jimmy Blank, and the former was a hoodoo while the latter was a cake. So upon that stricken multitude grim melancholy sat, for there seemed but little chance of Casey getting to the bat. But Flynn let drive a single to the wonderment of all, and Blake, the much despised, tore the cover off the ball. And when the dust had lifted and men saw what had occurred, there was Jimmy safe at second and Flynn a hugging third. Then from 5,000 throats and more there rose a lusty yell. It rumbled through the valley, it rattled in the dell, it pounded on the mountain and recoiled upon the flat, for Casey, mighty Casey, was advancing to the bat. There was ease in Casey's manner as he stepped into his place. There was pride in Casey's bearing, and a smile lit Casey's face. And then, when responding to the cheers, he lightly doffed his hat. No stranger in the crowd could doubt 'twas Casey at the bat. 10,000 eyes were on him as he rubbed his hands with dirt. 5,000 tongues applauded when he wiped them on his shirt. Then while the writhing pitcher ground the ball into his hip, defiance flashed in Casey's eye, a sneer curled Casey's lip. And now the leather-covered sphere came hurtling through the air, and Casey stood a-watching it in haughty grandeur there. Close by the sturdy batsman the ball unheeded sped. "That ain't my style," said Casey. "Strike one," the umpire said. From the benches black with people there went up a muffled roar, like the beating of the storm waves on a stern and distant shore. "Kill him! Kill the umpire!" shouted someone on the stand, and it's likely they'd have killed him had not Casey raised his hand. With a smile of Christian charity, great Casey's visage shone. He stilled the rising tumult. He bade the game go on. He signaled to the pitcher, and once more the dun sphere flew. But Casey still ignored it, and the umpire said, "Strike two!" "Fraud!" cried the maddened thousands, and echo answered fraud. But one scornful look from Casey, and the audience was awed. They saw his face grow stern and cold, they saw his muscles strain, and they knew that Casey wouldn't let that ball go by again. The sneer is gone from Casey's lip, his teeth are clenched with hate. He pounds with cruel violence his bat upon the plate. And now the pitcher holds the ball, and now he lets it go, and now the air is shattered by the force of Casey's blow. Oh, somewhere in this favored land the sun is shining bright, the band is playing somewhere, and somewhere hearts are light, and somewhere men are laughing, and somewhere children shout. But there is no joy in Mudville. Mighty Casey has struck out. How many of you saw that coming, fifth graders? Maybe you did. Maybe you've heard this poem before. Who knows? Okay, so let's take a look at the homework then. So again, looking into, I'm going to flip you around. Can be kind of working a little bit along with me. So number one, what is the poem title? So we're restating the poem title is, and of course we want to put our quotation marks. So I would pause as we're going. Period, quotation marks. So go ahead and finish this question and then come on back. Number two asks, who is the poem's author? So the poem's author is, and the period. Come on back when you're done. So 3 and 4 fifth graders were looking up these words, melancholy and defiance. Melancholy comes in the third stanza, 1, 2, 3. Defiance in the seventh. So as you are looking these up, you're going to look also at the poem and see which one of these best fits with the definition or with the context of the poem. Okay, the poem's rhyme scheme. What is the poem's rhyme scheme? The poem's rhyme scheme is what? Take a look at it. This is one that is exact. I think straight on through, top to bottom, every stanza has the same rhyme scheme. So I want you to try it on your own today. Remember, you start with A. Remember, we want to look at the number of lines in each stanza. That's how many letters should be in your rhyme scheme. Those two should match. Okay, so give it a try. I'm very curious to see how you guys do on your own, and I'll be giving feedback on that. I'm going to keep moving, so remember that you should be pausing as you're going if you're stopping to answer these questions throughout. So what is one character trait that Casey shows? One character trait that Casey shows is, so remember, this whole sheet has all kinds of character traits, and even if you paused as I'm like showing those through, you could find one. So you're going to pick just one character trait, well, two in the end, but one right now that represents a character trait that Casey has shown. And then as you're getting into here, you're going to say one quote that supports that character trait is, and remember, a quote should be the author's exact words. So you need to make sure that you're taking something directly out of the poem to support your character trait. And then you're going to redo it again. You're going to pick a second character trait, and then another quote to support it. And remembering, of course, to restate. When you get to number 10, what seems to be the main emotion that Fair wants readers to experience? So we'd say the main emotion that Thayer seems to want readers to experience is. So remember, this is kind of one where there could be more than one right answer, okay? Your answer doesn't have to be exactly what someone else might be thinking. But think about, what are you supposed to be feeling when you're reading this poem? What's he getting at? What does he want to create as an experience for his readers? Okay. And then again, you're going to support that with a quote. And again, restating the question in your answer there. Okay. You're going to do that twice. I'm asking for 2 quotes to do so. Okay. So let's just say one, the main emotion that Thayer seems to want readers to experience is, I don't know, romance. Okay. I wouldn't pick romance. That would be a poor choice. Okay. That's not very romantic. But then you're going to go and say, okay, one quote that supports my answer is, followed it up by a bashful kiss or two. Throw it back to Little Women, right? So then that would be a quote to support that answer. Or a second quote that supports your answer will fly at me again. I rather like it. Okay, so again, those would be not appropriate for this poem, but it gives you an idea of what you might be picking. And then finally, having read the poem again, thinking about what you think the climax is. Okay? So again, 5th graders, with the poetry, the poems themselves are pretty short. And so the work that we're doing is really digging in and looking at textual evidence to be able to support our thinking. Okay? So at this point, you may have, if you've been working along with me, you maybe have at least a portion of it done. If not, go on back and you can kind of work your way through it. But of course, if you've got questions along the way, feel free to come ask for help. All right, thanks.